Welcome back, everyone, and our colleague Ash Regan has now joined us. And we're moving on to a last set of questions on reporting and outcomes, which is an area that we've discussed throughout the process of the previous evidence that we've taken. So I'll hand over to you now, Ash Regan.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning to the panel. We have had a number of witnesses that have come in front of the committee that have very much suggested that this idea of how does the Parliament measure the outcomes that the supported bodies are producing. We've had some evidence, albeit in private session, that suggests that there are serious challenges in some areas, particularly, I think, possibly more for the advocacy-based ones on that side of things. Do you have any views on how you think that that could be improved?
So I think one of the challenges for us in answering that question are the limits of our responsibilities. If you're talking specifically of some of the advocacy office holders, their sort of functions in that regard are rightly scrutinised by other committees of Parliament, not by corporate body. We obviously receive annual reports and we have those conversations with office holders and sometimes their staff too about the outcomes, how they are meeting them, or how they are designing their services in order to facilitate those outcomes. But it is not our role to see, have they met all of their KPIs. Our roles are around the governance and accountability elements. But Jackson wants to come in too.
I was going to say, I mean, the agenda of the corporate body sometimes reminds me a bit like the Royal Court. I mean, we know what we're going to be discussing as we progress through the year because we go on a circular route into which we have to schedule and accommodate our business. And so the governance aspects of the responsibility that we have for the office holders is one that we can schedule with confidence. But for committees, I imagine this must be quite a challenge because in any given year, in any given Parliament, depending on the government's programme and the legislative spread of work that is suddenly presented to a committee, it must be, I think, potentially, if there are new commissioners being created and they look like they're all heading in the direction of one committee, very difficult. And so I suppose I return to the suggestions that we maybe discussed earlier on about whether there was a different model with the committee that maybe looked at the actual execution of the functions of the commissioners would be more effective. Because I don't think it's a lack of willingness. I just suspect for some commissioners, they are the responsibility of a committee that can't quite plan its workload because it didn't anticipate some very major piece of work. Either it was given or that it felt in all conscience it had to initiate itself, and that was very absorbing.
And sorry, if I may
just focus in on that just slightly more, just to get your opinion on this. So if there is a committee, not a committee, a commissioner rather, that is potentially not fulfilling its remit as set out in its enabling legislation, obviously it's funded by the corporate body. Maybe Parliament isn't doing its job effectively in that scrutiny. Would that be a concern? Would you seek to maybe suggest that in some way that the Parliament step up in some way?
And then Maggie Chapman with...
I would just be nervous. I mean, our responsibility as a corporate body is quite defined. We are there to manage the governance. We're not there really to express any executive comment on the way in which the committees discharge their functions, nor are we monitoring that as a corporate body. I mean, our responsibility is to exercise the responsibilities in statute for which we are responsible with regard to the governance.
And I suppose, in addition to that, I think there's something quite clearly looking at the range of office holders that exist, the remits and how they are defined in legislation they vary a lot, and the detail and specificity provided in those remits are also very broad. So there isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all way of monitoring that. But I think there might be, and this maybe ties back to earlier discussion around criteria. You know, what should the criteria for an office holder be in terms of remit, in terms of function, in terms of timescale? You know, to achieve certain functions. Having said that, I think that the corporate body would clearly take the view that we would welcome and we would want to support in any way we could committees to enhance their scrutiny, function, but that might be limited for reasons that we've already discussed around not only our capacity but overall parliamentary scheduling of business.
Of course, in that space, the SPCB does set the form and content of annual reports. I mean, has there been much thought about if that can be enhanced or changed to support more effective scrutiny?
So there've been discussions about the content, not only the content, but the sort of level of detail that's provided in reports, and some of that has been sort of discussed with individual office holders over the last few years in those one-to-one conversations that office holder services have. Coming to corporate body, if there are questions that we have, they say, actually, we want more information on this. That information is usually provided beyond the report, you know, beyond the framework of that sort of overall annual report. But it's certainly something we can take back to consider. Are there ways in which we can make more specific some of our requirements in those reports?
No, I just wanted to
I agree.
We can definitely take that away, definitely.
Okay. Sorry, Ash, back to you.
No, that's fine. So evidence that the committee has taken has suggested that office holders should be scrutinised by a parliamentary committee at least once a year. So I'm just wondering if you have any views on that and whether you think the timing is appropriate.
So, I mean, as we've discussed this morning as well, I think that there may well be good reason for additional scrutiny to happen, particularly if there are particular issues happening either in society in general, but that scrutiny function really is up to committees to determine. And I think one thing that it is an iterative process. Our relationship as corporate body and the office holder services with the conveners group, through that relationship we can say actually maybe there needs to be a little bit more time, a little bit more effort given to this particular issue. But obviously that does depend on committee's workload and committee's work programme, which we have no role and no scope to influence.
Okay, and the final question for me is that obviously there are other bodies that are funded directly by the Scottish Government, and their oversight, scrutiny and governance is in some cases quite different from the ones that the corporate body would be funding. I don't know how aware you are of those arrangements, but do you think there's anything that could be learnt from the way that the government carries out that scrutiny of the bodies that it funds?
I think it's a discussion that we are having ongoing. You know, what are those scrutiny functions? I think one of the things that, as Jackson has already alluded to, the role that corporate body has is quite clearly defined, and any changes to that would require legislative change. That doesn't mean to say we're against that. It's just not in our power to change it on our own volition. It would require that broader parliamentary conversation.
Okay, thank you, convener.
Okay, thank you. Do any other colleagues have any questions in this area? Any other questions that you wish to add that you didn't get to ask earlier? Okay, I just have one final question, and it goes back to our discussion just a few moments ago before we suspended, when Richard Leonard and Lorna Slater were asking questions around the powers and functions that the bodies have. We're just wondering if you have a view on whether the SPCO or the SHRC are currently set up to take on any additional powers, such as incorporating rights-based commissioners. Just be interested in your view on that.
So I think for the Scottish Human Rights Commission, I think one thing is clear is in our conversations as corporate body with the chair and commissioners, they are not opposed to having additional powers, even within the constrained thematic remits that it has. The challenge for them is capacity and resource, and I think one of the conversation, and this goes back to an earlier comment I made about the opportunities that were maybe open to us for discussion as a parliament with possible human rights legislation. If that human rights legislation had seen additional powers, additional duties given to the SHRC in particular, there would need to be conversations about additional resourcing. So I think the same is maybe it's a slightly different case for other commissioners, but I think for the SHRC particularly, there would need to be a conversation about resourcing, about prioritising of work. I think that the sense that I would maybe bring to from the Equalities, Human Rights and Civil Justice Committee perspective is that they want to do a whole load of other work. They just don't have the resources to do it.
Thank you. Jack Carl.
I guess the question is, what does that actually mean? Because I think it is the case that in the conversations we've had, there was a certain amount of disquiet that in fact the option had not been explored, and we discussed a moment ago as to how the mechanisms didn't provide for that happening. The one reservation I have is if we were talking about, for example, a couple, instead of becoming a couple of new commissioners, that they became departments of the existing commissioner, would then, having gone from wanting a summit to wanting a commissioner, would the mood then be we want to create a new department within the Commission, the existing Commissioner's portfolio? So we wouldn't actually have tackled the basic problem. We would just be identifying a new way for that problem to be, for that capacity to be expanded. And so, yes, it would be a resource issue, but what you could end up with was a huge thing with lots of different departments, with lots of different people. The question really is, I think, back to where do we think all this fits in to the democratic structure that we established when we created a Scottish Parliament, and what our responsibility should fundamentally be in this regard. Because I speak personally now, I thought a lot of these things were things we were elected to do, actually, in respect of our responsibility to hold government to account.
I mean, I think that's so important. I mean, this is about the realisation of rights and the delivery of public services. And if there anything more that you want to say and that you haven't had a chance to say so far today in that space, as we try and now move forward to come up with recommendations on that appetite that there is for there to be good delivery of public services and the realisation of rights, and where does all of this fit in?
Not from me, convener. We wait to be inspired.
We accept the challenge.
Thank you.
Maggie Chatwood?
No, just to say thank you for this. I think we want the Commissioner landscape to work. As corporate body, obviously, we want it to be as effective as it can be, and to work alongside the other functions of Parliament, whether those are scrutiny functions that, as parliamentarians, we have, but also, the committee structures that we have. I think that this conversation hopefully will allow Parliament to actually come to a decision that we can create models or structures that mean that we aren't in this position as a corporate body or as a committee to be having these same discussions again in the next 3 or 4 years. My final comment, I suppose, and maybe this isn't so much from a corporate body perspective, but it's related to these issues, is it comes back for me to that question is what has gone wrong that these commissioners are seen to be the answer or the solution to, and there is an element of there's an element of concern that I have that that growth in commissioners is seen as a sort of never-ending solution to the problem without actually tackling, as Jackson alluded to, that root cause. Do we need the functions that these commissioners have? Absolutely. Do we need those functions in the structures we currently have? Possibly not.
Well, thank you very much for all of your time and for your help and input to our task, and this has been a really helpful discussion, and that concludes the public part of today's meeting. Thank you. As previously agreed by the committee, we now move into private session.